Hi, welcome to another training video for the Yale School of Medicine CCMI X-ray Core Laboratory. In this segment, we'll be learning about the Mosquito by TTP Labtech. This is the Mosquito here. The Mosquito is a very robust instrument. It's designed for nanoliter scale pipetting, so it's accurate down to 20 nanoliters and can handle up to a few microliters. It's an excellent way to set up crystallization experiments, both sitting and hanging drops. It's also quite versatile. You can program it to do seeding for your crystallization drops. We can also do under oil, and more or less pretty much any crystallization experiment that you've designed to work in a 96 well or 384 well tray. In addition to crystallography, it can be used as an advanced liquid handling system. So you can set up 384 or 1536 well trays for use in kinase assays or other enzymatic assays, as opposed to just crystallography. So again, this is the Mosquito here. It uses disposable tips that act as nanoliter scale micropipettes. It uses, they're disposable, so you can use a different tip for each one of your samples to avoid cross-contamination and keep both your screens as well as your protein pure quality. This silver box is the humidification chamber, and there's two humidifiers that are attached to it. Within the humidification chamber is the deck that holds up to 5 plates. The way it works is that the deck moves back and forth underneath the head, and the head is what actually acts as the multi-channel pipetter for the tips. So when you're getting it ready to use the Mosquito, you'll be bringing your material down. Your protein sample, of course. You want to bring gloves and your other required safety equipment. Also, you're required to bring your own disposable plastics and consumables. So that would be your 96 well trays with your screens in them. Presumably, you've set those up back in the wet lab. Also want to bring your pipette tips to work with. You'll need to get some of these, the protein strips from TTP Labtech. We have some here if you need a few, but if you're going to use a large amount, you're expected to buy your own. Okay, so when you're getting ready to use the Mosquito, first thing you want to do is turn it on. It should be off at all times, unless you're using it. There's a switch back here by the power cord. If you can't quite feel where it is, just go around and you'll see it. Turn it on, and then the control computer is located here. It's dedicated to the Mosquito. So you'll log in with your NetID or a local account if you have one. Okay, so you'll go into Windows. So somewhere on your desktop there should be a icon for the Mosquito. So you'll double click that and it should start the program. Now if the robot's on, it's going to ask you to initialize to use it. Before you hit the initialization button, you want to make sure that the the area where the deck is that moves back and forth is clear. So you don't want any beakers, or plates, or anything in there. Because as the deck moves, it's going to bang into those and knock them over and possibly jam the robot. Now, when we initialize it, the robot should make a particular sound. Okay, so that's the sound that it makes when it initializes properly. If it makes a much louder sort of banging sound, It's possible that the deck is jammed. If that's the case, exit the software, turn off the robot, wait a minute, turn the robot on, try again. If it fails a second time, find me and I'll see what's wrong. Okay, so the software's on, the robot's ready to go. Let me go through the stuff that you're going to need to have prepared. As I said, it's got a humidification chamber as well as 2 humidifiers. One is in the front here, and the other one is back here. It is possible to rearrange those to get more humidification at the far ends of the deck versus the center, or more humidification in the center if you like. So if you want to use the humidification chamber, we'll shut it and get some humidity going at the beginning. Get some distilled water and pour it in here. Doesn't take much, it's up to that. Up till it's full. Same with the one in the back. Okay. So there's 2 ways to do it. You can either, at the bottom of this tab, if you just hit humidify, the humidifiers will come on and start to fill the chamber with cool humidified air. It's also possible in your protocol to insert a step that adds humidification at certain times, and we'll get to that in a little bit later in detail. So let me turn that humidification off for a second. So other things you'll need are, as I said, your screens that you'll set up in your lab. For today, we're going to do examples of a sitting drop using Corning 3553 plates, which are popular. Also what are popular are the IntelliPlate 2 and 3 drop sitting drops. We'll also do a hanging drop example. For that, the plate type is a little less specific. You can use Falcon, these Nunk plates, or Griner plates. If you have a different manufacturer plate, let me know. I'll make sure the definition is correct. Also for hanging drop plates, you'll need a plate seal on the top. The preferred one is from TTP Labtech. It's the View Drop 3 UV plate seal. It's UV transparent, so when we get to the rock imager, we can take UV pictures through it. The only drawback is these are fairly expensive. There are cheaper plate seals from TTP Labtech and some other competitors. What you want to keep in mind is if you get the other plate seals, they tend to have a different thickness. So we'll just program a different definition for those plate seals and run a test run before your protein comes out. Other things you're going to need are a little bit of 50% ethanol, some Kim wipes, so the metal components are all stored in the drawer down here that's labeled Mosquito user supplies. This is referred to as the XLT8 plate. This is where the protein sample is going to go. So you can see there's a magnetic lid that holds on here, and those protein strips fit right in here. You can use up to 4 strips at once. That way you can program to do 4 different, up to 4 different proteins or concentrations or combinations or whatever you like. Also for hanging drop plates, you'll need this block, which I'll get to in a minute. And also for hanging drop plates, you'll need this jig, which I'll show you how to use in a second. Also, there's a pair of scissors in there, and that's for cutting the tips when you're done during cleanup. And there's a brayer that you can use. Please. Okay, now we're going to see how to set up your typical sitting drop experiment with the Mosquito. So once you have the program started and the Mosquito initialized, you'll go into Programs, or go into Open, and open your protocol. What you should do is create a folder on your desktop that'll house all of your protocols. That way, since you're logged in with your NetID, no one else will be able to modify them and they won't get corrupted. So in this case, I've opened up a protocol I have saved that is for sitting drops. So in this case, we're going to be using Corning 3553 sitting drop plates, which have 3 drop locations, and I'm going to use 3 different concentrations of one protein in one screen. So this tab here in the protocol is setup. These 5 blocks represent the 5 spaces on the deck, and here's where you define what plate type is in each place. So positions 1, 4, and 5 are empty. Position 2 is going to hold that XLTL8 micro reservoir, which holds the protein, and then your crystallization tray is going to be in position 3. If you have different type of tray, either select it from the definitions here, or we'll have to make a new definition if it's a new one. Then we're going to go over to the protocol step here. Now on the protocol step, you'll notice that there's buttons for park left and park right. What those will do is move the deck back and forth. If I park left, and park left again, now positions 2 and 3 I can get access to. So I'll go back to the Setup tab. So the XLTL8 is going to go in this position. So that's it here. When you put the blocks or the plates in, there'll be on the lower right corner, there'll be a spring tab here. You want to use the spring tab to hold the plate in position like that. In the 2 positions right next to the head, the spring is retracted to allow you to put a plate in without having to push the spring back. Just be aware of that. Also, what you want to make sure you absolutely do not do is have the plate up on top of that spring tab like that. That's going to be high enough where it's going to hit the guard on the head. So that'll fit in like so. We'll then need our protein strips, which come in this little bag. So in this case, we're doing 3 different concentrations of protein. So I'll need 3 strips. As I said earlier, you should purchase some of these from TTP Labtech. I have some here. If you run out, or if you're a first-time user, you can use them. And they fit right into the holes that are in the aluminum block. It doesn't really matter which way they go. I typically put them in this orientation. Okay. So then the magnetic cover fits right on there, and it should fit nice and snugly, and the reservoirs should be nice and flat. So those are ready to go. Concerning these strips again, they're surprisingly expensive. It is possible after your experiment you can clean them, just rinse them with water, 50% ethanol, and dry them off. You can use them over if you're on a budget trying to save some money. Next, I'll put in the tray. So you'll have your screen here, either 1 or 10 or 20, however many of your experiments you're going to do. So take the first one. Presumably, you'll have set up the screen up in the wet lab and put a temporary seal over it to prevent it from spilling. carefully remove your lid. I don't usually reuse those. And gently place your screen in here. So the last thing you want to do is put the protein in. Make sure everything else is set up and ready to go first. And the reason for that is if you have a little issue with your screen or something, the protein's not evaporating while it sits there. Also, if you're worried about protein evaporation for long experiments, you can put pauses into the protocol where it'll stop until you tell it to start again, and you can pipette your protein there. So at this point, you would get your protein and your pipetter. So in this particular case, we're going to be using 3 different proteins to set up 1 drop for each screen. So if you use this a few times, you want to get familiar with how to program these lines. This is a pretty basic program. You can get it to do some pretty advanced things. The only thing you're limited by is the fact that it pipettes in the Y direction, so you're limited by those 8 tips have to do the same thing in the Y direction. So row 1, the first thing it's going to do is aliquot your protein. So it's going to go from position 2, which is tray position 2, which is your sample. And from there, it's going to go from spot 1 in that, which, if we look at a representation of the plate here, position 2 is here, and then within position 2, this is 1 here. And it's in green to tell you where it's going to take it from. So that's your source. It's then going to bring it to destination, which is position 3 here, and start in position 1 and go to 12. So from here down to 12, and that's going to be subwell 2. Now the Mosquito refers to the 3 wells in the 3553 trays as 2, 3, and 4, and the large well is 1. The NT8 and the imager refer to them as 1, 2, and 3. So the conversion is pretty easy, 2, 3, 4 to 1, 2, 3. And again, you can see that that's lit up in blue here. The next thing it'll do is copy from well 1 of the screen into drop or well 2, where the protein's already been put, and continue that with changing tips between each one all the way down to row 12. They'll then repeat that same operation for protein number 2 in this column to subwell 3, and then copy the screen again, and then aliquot the 3rd protein into drop 4 or subwell 4, and then again copy the screen there, and then it'll finish up. And it tells you how many tips you're going to use per experiment. Here is 312. So once you're confident that your program is going to work, you want to pipette the protein in. So how much protein you put in? There's an easy calculation for that. For example, here we're doing drops that are 250 nanoliters of protein and 250 nanoliters of your precipitant screen. So for 250 nanoliters of protein, that's going to go into 12 wells. So 12 times 250 is 3 microliters. So what you want to do is take that value, multiply that by 1.6, and that's going to be how much you want to put in each one. So 3 times 1.6 is 5.2, I believe. Take your pipetter, take your protein, and gently put 5.2 in each one of these protein strip wells. When you do that, you want to avoid bubbles, but don't be too fussy about it because you'll just make more bubbles, and you run the risk of taking a long time and other ones evaporate. The reason we have to multiply by 1.6 is simply the inefficiency of the machine, and you'd rather have a little bit extra than run out towards the end. Once you put the protein in, you can close the humidification chamber, start the humidification here if you like. You'll see the humidifiers start to put in some cool humidified air, and then you can run the program. It's going to go over, pick up some of the protein and drop it into subwell 2. The tips only hold 1.2 microliters, so it will pull up enough to do, in this case, 4 wells, and then go back and get more protein each time. Okay, at that point it exchanged for new tips, and now it's going into the crystallization screen and bringing that up to subwell 2. And again, it's going to exchange the tips each time to ensure cross-contamination between the different streams, so you don't get inorganic crystals forming because of that. So the program will just continue until it gets to the end. For this purpose, I'm just going to stop it. So if it runs into a problem, like the tips start, mostly if the tips start coming out kind of mangled, or if you realize you forgot to add the protein or some other problem is going on, there's a button here, which is abort. So hit that, and then it's going to ask you, are you sure? Hit that, and it should quit. If you had a problem with a plate being in the wrong place, or something that caused the tips to get jammed and start to grind up and come out mangled, let me know, and I'll reset it. Because if it's jammed inside the head, it'll continue to do that, and I'd rather fix it before we have more problems. So if that had finished successfully, you'd open the humidification chamber, take your screen out, put your seal on top of it, seal that up with the brayer, and then it's ready to go to the imager or to the other incubator, wherever you want to keep it. One suggestion I have is if you're doing multiple trays, like even more than 1, up to 10, take the tray that you finished and put it somewhere safe, like over by the imager or in the incubator. Because when you do that second operation, it's going to be exactly the same as the first one, except now you're going to have one more thing in your way, which you don't want to drop, because this is your experiment. The computer's a fairly good spot. Okay, that's how to set up sitting drops. When you're done with the session, what you want to do is take all your trays off the deck. Take the metal XLT 8 out and get rid of your protein strips. There should be a biohazard bucket there. This will go back in the drawer with all the other tools, and the drawer is labeled as to where they go. Shut the humidification chamber. So if you used a lot of humidity and there's condensation inside, wipe that up and leave it open so it's dry, so we don't get any mold or anything building up. Then you want to take the scissors, cut off the tips, throw those out, and then the last thing you'll do is log out of the program, or close the program, turn the robot off. Be sure you turn the robot off. It's protected by a battery backup and whatnot, but still, if you have a power spike, you don't want to ruin it. And then just log out of Windows. And the software writes a report for each plate that you do, so we can look back and have a record of how it pipetted, and also keeps track of how many pipette tips you use for when we bill for replacement materials. So that's sitting drop. And we'll set up a hanging drop experiment in the next segment. Okay, in this segment, we're going to learn how to use the Mosquito to set up hanging drop experiments. Basically, in the software, once you have it up and running, you'll pull up a hanging drop experiment. Here's an example of a simple one where we have the 5 positions on the deck. You'll need the protein reservoir, your screen that you'll bring down, as well as some of the plate seals. Then over in the protocol tab, the protocol is pretty straightforward. We're in the first row. It's going to aliquot 400 nanoliters of protein from position 1 in the protein strip into all 12 columns. And then it's going to change tips, and it's going to make a mirror image of the screen that's in this position onto the drops, and it'll change tips every time in that to prevent cross-contamination. And the reason it makes a mirror image is when we put the seal on the plate, the correct precipitants will line up. Okay, so let me set up the deck next. So we'll open up the humidity chamber, and we can use our park programs to move the deck back and forth. The first thing you want to do is take your screen, which you set up upstairs, and put a temporary lid on. Place that in the middle position, in position 3, and make sure the bottom corner is held in place by the spring tab. Next, in deck position 2, you'll want this XLT8 protein reservoir, which is this guy again. So I'll put that down again, make sure the spring tab holds it, and you can remove the magnetic cover. Take one of the protein strips. If you're doing a more advanced procedure, you might need more than one protein strip in the other positions. Place that in place. Get the magnetic cover on and make sure it's nice and snug. Next, we'll set up the View Drop 3 plate seal. As I've said before, from TTP Labtech sells this the View Drop 3 UV plate seal. These are probably the best ones. They're UV transparent from when we get to the rock imager, and most of the programs have this definition in them. There's other ones you can use. We'll just have to make sure that the thickness is the same or adjust the plate definition so you can use those. So here's one we're going to set up. And for the hanging drop, we'll need these 2 pieces, this plate and this little jig, and we'll get to the jig at the end. So for this plate, we'll put it down like so. Take a little bit of 50% ethanol, put that on there, and spread a thin layer of 50% ethanol. At this point, you're not trying to clean it, you're just trying to put a layer there, so you'll get some surface tension adhesion with the lid. So then take the protective layer here, and you should have the sticky part up. I usually place it like so, because you don't want too many bubbles underneath it. And then you'll see the 3 silver circles. You want those in the center of the corresponding corner positions for the drops. It's important to get those exactly right because that's going to dictate the position of the plate for the rest of the experiment, both putting it onto the screen and also going through the imager. And so I'm going to park right again. I'll put this in here. It's the same setup as this side, where the little spring tab will hold it in place. Okay, once the deck is set up, the last step will be to put your protein sample in. And the reason we put the protein sample in is because it is likely your most valuable resource. And if you have a problem setting up the plate seal or the screen or something, you don't want the protein sitting out and drying out. So the rule of how much protein do you put in the protein reservoir is pretty simple. If we're going to put 400 nanoliter protein drops, basically we take 400 nanoliters, multiply that by 12, because we have 12 columns that it's going to fill, and then we want to multiply that by 1.6, and that's to cover the slight inefficiency of the system. So it gives us 7680 nanoliters. So 8 microliters is probably going to be plenty. Because you don't want, if you end up short, you'll end up with bubbles towards the end. Basically set your pipetter to 8 microliters, or whatever your protocol comes up with. And then you want to place the protein right in there carefully into the protein reservoir. They're listed as 5 microliter reservoirs, but they'll hold quite a bit more than that. You just want to make sure you don't have too many bubbles. But if you do get a bubble, don't fuss over it too much, because you're just going to make more bubbles. Okay, once the protein's loaded in all 8 positions, you're ready to go. We go here, hit run, should start up. So first thing it's going to do is it's going to come over and pick up some protein and start to aliquot it onto the plate seal. Now the tips themselves hold a maximum of 1.5 microliters. So if your procedure requires more than 1.5 microliters, it'll just go back and get more protein. So in this case, it's doing 3 at a time, which is 1.2 microliters. That leads to part of that inefficiency where you have to multiply by 1.6 times. Okay, so it's done with the protein. So now it's going to pick up the precipitant from column 1, go all the way down to column 12 to make the mirror. Change tips so we don't get cross-contamination of the precipitants. Now it's doing column 2 to column 11, and so forth. Okay, so at this point the program's finished. It's precipitated pipetted the precipitant into all 12 positions on the seal. At this point you'll need this jig. Place that here. When it finishes, it should put your screen in the position next to the head. Take the screen out carefully, place it in here, and just give it a little nudge towards H12 so it fits in there nicely. Next thing is putting the plate seal on top of there. So take the block that has the plate seal on it that's stuck on there with the 50% ethanol. And what you want to do is flip it over casually. Not too fast, not too slow, just turn it over. And then the 3 poles here, you want it touching all 3 poles, and you want it level. And then slide down, and then give it some pressure, like some good pressure there. You're not going to crack the plate. Once you've done that, hold the plate itself with your finger here and slide the block off. You can clean up that extra 50% ethanol. Then the plate seal's on the plate. It should be in the right position if you had it in the right position on the silver circles there. Next step is to use the brayer to make sure the plate seal is on there. And then the final step, which can be a little difficult, is that there's a protective layer of plastic over what the optically clear UV transparent layer that the drop is actually sitting on. Okay, so you want to remove that top layer to expose the optically clear lower layer. And this can be kind of difficult. Gonna get the edge of it. And you lift that off. And you'll know it's the right one because it's very thin and flexible, and there'll be another thicker layer still stuck to the top of the plate. So gently remove and discard that. And now your plate's ready to go for either storage in one of the incubators or the cold room, or most likely in the Rock Imager 1000. And then you're ready to repeat the process for your next plate. One suggestion I have is once you've made a plate, put it somewhere safe. I usually put them over by the imager because you're going to make the barcodes anyway. The reason for that is for the second round, now you have something new here, which is the plate, and it might be in the way and you don't want to drop it. And that's basically the hanging drop. And the cleanup is the same as the cleanup for the sitting drop. Take all your material away, put all the tools, the brayer, the jig in the drawer, turn off the robot, and close the software. And then, of course, at the end, you'll take the scissors and cut the tips off. If you set the garbage, they'll just feed in there the entire time. Snip those, and that's pretty much it for cleanup. Just